Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us as we take a look at what happened this past year and also a look at the trends that are coming in the year 2023. It was a big year of disruption, no matter how you look at it. There were a lot of big major trends impacting all of retail, food and beverage, supplements specifically, as well as some emerging trends that came out and surprised us. So we have a lot to cover, so just wanted to set the tone real quick, and we want to jump right into it. And so Jeff's going to take us through. This was the biggest trend of the whole year across retail, across really everything, right? And so this was inflation. So Jeff, what were the actual numbers like for this year?
Yeah, so we're looking at some U.S. Bureau of Labor statistics just to kind of ground us on kind of the inflation picture. And you can see that, if we look at some of the top categories that the government tracks, you can see that things like cereals and bakery products are almost 16% price increase versus a year ago. Dairy products also about 16%. And you can see the fruits and vegetables and the meat. So really, there's a lot of budget pressure on consumers. And the other two things that I found really interesting was if you look at food at home, the government breaks it out, food at home, food away from home. Those prices that consumers, when they're shopping at store, are actually higher than if they're actually dining out. So really, I read a couple of articles about, there are some consumers that are, eating out more just because prices tend to be a little bit cheaper if you're going to some of those fast food restaurants. But of course, we know kind of for better for you, a lot of folks are shopping at home. And so you can see the aggregate of kind of what those prices look like. And I think that's pretty telling. I mean, it's, I was reading this morning where, they think maybe the prices have peaked. There was something like 7%. So I think we may have hit the top. But again, it's going to be something that we have to continue to monitor.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting that certainly while food at home has gone up by more, it's still significantly cheaper than eating at restaurants. So as people are feeling their pockets pinched, that's one of the major reasons why across most categories we've been seeing dollar increases, but units decline. And so, a lot of it's due to, the double-digit price increase.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and if we want to move to the next slide, Scott, we can use some of our scan data to look at just kind of top line sales across the entire store. And, if you're looking left to right, the one thing that I'll point out is that those more conventional focus chains, multi-outlet MULO up, 14%, US food even a little bit higher. And the area that I want to point out is that natural retailers, those that really kind of focus on kind of better for you products, have held prices lower than the other formats. They're still going up. But I think that, a lot of these natural retailers are very cognizant of perhaps a kind of pricing premium that you see in some of those stores for some of these more organic or some of these other kind of specialty products. And so I'm not surprised to see natural retailers hold those a little bit less. And we actually did a little bit of a lens on just strictly natural products. And those prices are a little bit higher even for the natural channel. But the natural channel itself, compared to other channels, still is holding their pricing lower relative to the other channels that we're tracking.
And Jeff, is that a similar story though to eating at home versus not at home, where the prices tend to be premium in that channel to start with? So is it still is there still like a price gap, or has things kind of closed up?
Yeah, I mean, we'll look at this in a second about kind of the difference between kind of all products and then natural products, putting that natural lens on the kind of the total basket. But certainly, that kind of premiumization of products, certainly the idea that kind of keeping those a little bit lower means that shoppers in those channels aren't feeling the shock quite as much.
Awesome. And then Jessica, I know you work with a lot of our retailers. What were some of the strategies that people did to work with inflation this year?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things that retailers and brands really worked on. I know putting more promotions out there was one of them. In some cases, with doing more digital coupons and some different means of doing that, working with brands. So that was one thing that we know was important, especially in the more conventional categories. And another thing I know that a lot of people did was working with sizes. Unfortunately, this isn't always great for the shopper, but you know, doing some size reduction and trying to hold the price steady. So that was one thing we saw across the board a lot too. So I would say those are the two primary things that we saw.
Yeah, that's the interesting shrinkflation, right? Where
Exactly.
the 4-pack now costs what the 6-pack cost, but the consumers were willing to pay that for the product. So I don't, and it's hard to go back once you've switched to the smaller sizes at the same price point. So it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward. And then Jeff, here's some key categories you want to take a look at, right? I mean, some things just jump off the screen, like eggs, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to always kind of look at these staple categories. So we pulled all products and looked at kind of what was growing the fastest. And so you can see, you know, pet food is one of those, wellness bars, some of these other pantry staples like hot cereals, pastas, eggs. And I think that's been all over the news. We've seen that all over the place. The one thing that I'll point out is that if you look at sort of natural products, you see that the price is growing a little bit slower than what we're seeing for all products. But when we look over at private label, I think private label is obviously another trend that we'll kind of look at in a little bit. But the price increase for private label eggs has gone up significantly. Now, there is a disclaimer on that typically these private label products are cheaper from a dollar standpoint, but it just shows that, you know, rising prices, you know, influence all brands, including store brands. And so, you know, really it's this overlapping inflation that we're seeing kind of across the board.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see things like in certain categories where private label, the price is going up at a faster rate than the branded products, but also when you look at things like wellness bars, they kind of held flat. And so I think it's really interesting that it's category specific. And, you know, beyond inflation, I would say probably, you know, the number 2 trend of this year was private label. And so all the trends in private label, I know we're going to get into that a little more. But, you know, private brands really taking a lot of share as they always do in like economic uncertainty times.
Yep. Yeah, and so for this one, you know, wanted to look at, you know, all products that we have scanning across the entire store, and then putting that natural lens on it so we can see just from a year-over-year price increase. And so we talked a little bit about, you know, is inflation capping out? And we can see back in September that from all products, we got up to about 17% increase, and we're starting to kind of nudge down a little bit delayed on that. You see that in October for natural products specifically. But really the idea is that natural products in many cases always have this sort of mystique of being, you know, a greater price. But I think this is an opportunity for a lot of the natural brands to really highlight, you know, they're holding their prices. That kind of price disparity between a conventionally focused and a natural brand is lessening to some extent. And then secondarily, that we're starting to see those kind of increasing prices start to cap out. Obviously, we're going to need to continue to monitor this to see what it looks like as we move through the holidays. Tons of shopping coming up with the December holidays. But I do think that kind of based on some of the news we've heard this morning and some of the data that we've seen within our scan data, it looks like we may have hit the top, fingers crossed.
Yeah, that'd be, I think, welcome for everyone. And it's curious to, as we look back on the year, you know, as there was so much inflation and so much uncertainty, you know, Jake, I'm wondering, you know, did you see that when products coming in, was there a slowdown in innovation, or, you know, were people kind of rearing to get back from some of the COVID supply chain issues of the prior year? And did we see some of that innovation released in some of these new products?
You know, I don't really think we saw kind of like a slowdown in innovation. And you know, Scott, this is something that I'll kind of like point to on, you know, some slides later on here. But, you know, I would say that innovation, it went probably more towards like this mainstream type of route, right? You know, I think we saw kind of like a refocus on things like nutrition and, you know, some of that differentiation kind of focused on, you know, some of those core aspects of and familiar aspects to shoppers, things like whole grains, less sugar. kind of expanding their footprint into new categories. So these established brands using these familiar kind of nutritional concepts to make inroads into new categories. And I think that's kind of where we saw that innovation start occurring here.
Yeah, and I think it's only going to accelerate if we can taper down some of these pricing increases as consumers kind of will get used to a certain price point, so that they'll be more likely to start trying these new purchases as well. All right, and then as we drive into one of the mega trends that has kind of been going on, through all these disruptions, is this demand for sustainability. So Jessica, can you take us through? I know there's some differences between Gen Z and millennials, and I guess what we're referring to as older generations. So what are some of these differences?
Yeah, absolutely. So sustainability, the way I've been kind of talking about this over 2022 is I don't even like to say it's a trend. It's a lifestyle, it's a way of thinking. And just like we've talked about plant-based over the past 5 or 10 years, I don't think this is a short-term trend that's going to go anywhere in the next 2 to 3 years. I think this is a mindset. It's a way of living that's really here to stay. And so when you look at shoppers who are interested in these products and really believing that it's important when they're selecting products, almost 4 out of every 5 shoppers are looking for this, and that's up 8 points since 2021. So huge jump in interest year over year, but the large majority of people are saying that they're interested in sustainable products. So as we look at the information in this chart with sustainable solutions and looking at Gen Z and millennials versus some of the older generations, what you'll see here is very high rates of interest in reducing the reduced products and waste post-consumption of products. You see things like minimizing environmental impact, and that's really where you start to see the Gen Z and millennials having a even higher interest than some of the older generations in sustainable solutions and looking for those when they're interacting on shelf. So if you move to the next slide, what's really interesting is we are getting the question at retail when we're working with brands at Spins, and just as an industry all around right now, what is going through the shopper's mind as they're thinking about sustainability, and what are those key attributes that are resonating with shoppers? Now, there's a lot of different ways that you can approach sustainability, and there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. So that's the thing that's a little bit tricky about this versus something like plant-based or organic or any of the other more natural attributes that we've seen over the last 20 years, where it's not an either or solution. There's a lot of different ways you can approach this. But when you look at this data here, environmental by far and large is the biggest way that shoppers are thinking about this right now. It's not to say that social is not playing into this or business practices are not playing into this, but environmental is by far the first thing that's really top of mind as shoppers are going in store or online and kind of thinking about the approach. So you can see the renew, reuse, recycle is at almost 80% is what people are associating with sustainability. But of these 10 or so attributes associated with it, environmental should be the first focus if you are a brand or an organization thinking about what should I approach it with. So if we go to the next slide, when we talk to shoppers about sustainability and their attitudes towards it, it's really interesting because Jeff just got done talking about all the inflationary pressures that we've seen throughout 2022. And despite all of that, the large majority of shoppers, 2 out of every 3, are willing to pay more for sustainability. But especially those younger shoppers with the Gen Z and millennials, almost 80% of them are willing to pay more. So very large interest. But what's interesting as you kind of go through the different facts on this slide is that people are saying they're having a hard time identifying those products on shelf. So we know through talking with shoppers that language is a really quick and easy way to understand, both for retailers in store and online and through brand messaging, that language is important, and 50% of shoppers say that. So how do we communicate through language, through attribution? Well, we know the most certain way, and to create a standard throughout the industry is an unbiased third party or a certification, as shoppers feel like that is a trusted source that they can go to any store, look at any brand, and know that it's going to be a consistent way to understand it.
And
So
so Jessica, real quick, sorry,
yeah.
one of the other things that I think is really noteworthy that you were talking about is, how important it is for brands to be able to get their messaging across. And we're going to hear, you're going to talk right on this slide about the certifications, but it's also having that product content available online, right? So like when people are
Absolutely.
searching for things, whether it's on their own website, the retailer's website, or a D2C play, having that product content available, even if it's off the label, if the products qualify, I know, Jake, that's something we our product intelligence does all the time. So making sure the consumers are able to find products that are inherently either doing some of these things or that can be attributed to it. So it's so important. I just wanted to mention it. Jessica, what about these certifications?
Yeah, certainly. And I think something else that I recently saw in a study was on a label, you can't have too much attribution because it confuses shoppers and it's not quick and easy to understand on shelf. So I think around 3 was the magic number that they were talking about in this study. 3 is what gets your message across in a simple, easy way to understand. So when you're talking about sustainability, if that's the focus of your product and the most important thing that you want to communicate your product or brand strategy with, when it comes to sustainability, there's really 3 buckets that you can think about and really ways that you can approach it from. So there's material and ingredient focused, environmental impact, and then holistic business practices. Within each of these buckets, these are some of the most widely recognized and popular attributes from an industry standard that you can use. There's tons more that are not included in this slide, but these are just some of the most recognized one from a shopper standpoint. But to your point, you can do things like online searches with them, QR codes, websites on the back with additional information. But the more power you can put being able to search and identify these products, certainly the better. So very important for identifying and messaging.
And then Jessica, how would you recommend, I know you said you saw the study that said 3 was kind of the most until consumers say they get a little confused. They think you're putting a little too much on the label. So if you're an emerging brand, maybe this is a question for everyone, how would you go about kind of choosing the 3? Is it just like figuring out what's the really core of your product and your messaging? And then, Jake, I know there's certain categories that some of the certifications play better in than others as well. So kind of an open question if you have any response to that, Jessica or Jake or Jeff.
Yeah, so I'll take it from the retail side and kind of the perspective of this article, since it was from like the retail / shopper perspective. And that was you want to take it from what is most important about your product in terms of if it's organic, and that's kind of the thing that you stand for. You definitely want that on there. But we know at retail, let's say you're selling a tortilla chip. Why does a big retailer need a 20th SKU of tortilla chip if they already have 10 other organic tortilla chips? So what's that differentiating attribute that you can put next to the organic that's really going to make you stand out and differentiate you from everyone else? So maybe you're organic and certified B. So that's going to really be something different that shoppers haven't seen in the aisle before. So what's your brand stand for? And then what's your differentiator? Were kind of the aspects that this study was talking about approaching it from.
Yeah, and I think it's really hard because all these certifications, I think, add a lot of value. But it's interesting to see as consumers kind of evolve. We see a lot of changing, values amongst consumers, and so it's really kind of catching them where they're at with some of these certifications. I think it's definitely brand specific. But yeah, anyone else? Anything else to add there? We good? All right. Moving on. Plant-based, we heard a lot in the news. We were asked a lot of this, from different media requested presentations. Plant-based, one of the mega trends of the past 5 years, growing at, mid to high double digits at some points, kind of came back down to earth. Saw some very modest growth. I believe it was in the single digits for the year. Jessica, correct me if I'm wrong. But what were people saying about it?
Yeah, so there's some different things that people are saying more recently about plant-based. And again, when we talked about sustainability, one of the first things that comes to mind is plant-based for a lot of people. And so we know that these plant-based burgers, sausages, things like that were coming to a lot of people's homes throughout the past couple of years and on menu boards of chains like Subway and Starbucks. And especially during the pandemic, plant-based grocery store sales surged as curious shoppers looked for some of these options. However, when you talk to shoppers and some of their reactions as they may have tried these products for the first time, they have mixed things to say. So some of the better things are that they like that it's more environmentally friendly, a good way to incorporate more plants into their diet. As we know, people got a little bit more health conscientious over the past several years. But price point, huge barrier for a lot of people. Especially we'll talk about it being more than some of the animal counterparts. The composition of the product, it's not always great from a texture and often taste standpoint as well. So taste for a lot of people is a huge barrier in terms of if people are used to a traditional meat or dairy alternative, it's not what they're used to. So why would they pay more for a texture and taste that isn't as good as something that they're used to, even if it is a little bit more healthy? So a lot of mixed reviews with plant-based over the past several years. So
hold on real quick, Jeff. I know we were at a plant-based world earlier this year. What were you seeing? Were you seeing a pullback in new products? Was the product quality up to par, so to speak, or were you kind of seeing a pullback as well?
I mean, I think that we saw from an innovation standpoint a bit of a pullback. We saw a lot of kind of meat alternatives as opposed to something like a dairy alternative that we had traditionally seen at other shows. And so I think it really depends on some of the kind of the VC money that we're seeing more broadly in the industry and these kind of different forms that they're taking. So a lot of times we would see something like a deli, or we'd see something like a tender or something. And so it's really, this in some ways a little bit of an oversaturation. So it does make sense that we're seeing a little bit of recalibration of what we're seeing in the industry. And I think it just shows that some of the really good brands that we see are, sustaining themselves or winning at that. But it makes sense. It's been a hot market. So we would expect to see a lot of new folks trying different innovative products to see what sticks and what doesn't.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that growth that was spreading across was spreading across all new categories. It's really plant-based is really in almost every category now. So I think most of the people, there's a lot of people who have tried it now. Whereas a lot of that, introduction and discovery growth, is no longer there. Now we're going to see more, organic growth. I wouldn't say it's a mature category yet, but it's it's becoming, what's Jessica's, it's 7 billion now, something like that.
Yeah, it's
so
huge.
it's a very large market now. But it's really interesting to see kind of these changing views as the category develops.
Yeah, for sure. And so this is the actual numbers when you look at performance by channels. So we have our proprietary natural and regional grocery channels, and then the conventional or multi-outlet channel as well. But you really see the sinking sales of alternative meat products that has been driven by fluctuating prices. And we talked about in 2020, the demand surged for these products while the rising cost of animal prices went up due to the supply chain disruptions. But inflation is really hurting these plant-based products while they struggle to make their products more affordable and really in par with the price per pound of traditional meat and poultry. And so it's understandable why shoppers are reluctant to pay a premium for the alternative product, giving some of the feedback that we saw on the previous slide. And so as we look at performance, it is doing best in the conventional channels, but really a similar story all around. So both dollars and units are declining while prices have increased and promotional dollars have declined. And despite the minimal gains in distribution that we're seeing, it's not offsetting some of the barriers that are preventing shoppers in engaging with this segment more heavily. So something really is going to have to change if plant-based meat and dairy is going to be the future that it's predicted to be in the next 10 years. So if we talk about what needs to happen, one of the things is who is the target shopper for these products. And so for a long time, plant-based products were primarily focused on shoppers trying to eliminate meat and dairy altogether from their diets. However, when you look at the vast majority of shoppers who are interacting with plant-based today, the vegan shopper only represents a tiny portion of the overall population, only about 2 to 4%. Almost half of the people that are flexitarians, or someone who is trying to incorporate more plant-based meals, maybe incorporating a plant-based diet a couple days a week, are flexitarians. So almost half of the population. So some of the interesting facts on the right, I'm not going to hit all of them, but a couple that were kind of hard hitting for me as we've learned more about this over the last couple of years is almost half the people that purchase plant-based milk also purchase animal-based milk. And we know that millennials and Gen Zs are the future of retail, and they are by far the most engaged in the flexitarian trend. And so by shifting focus to the collective rather than focus on the vegan outliers for taste and texture and really what that small segment is interested in, retailers and brands really can expect an audience that's almost 10 times larger than the current focus. So really the key takeaway here is sustainability and plant-based are trends that are here to stay, but we need to focus on the larger key audience and the primary drivers for motivation.
That's a great point, and it'll be interesting to see the bounce back or continued struggles of plant-based as we get into 23. I think that we're going to see, a bounce back, especially in some of the dairy categories. I think some of the data was mostly meat, plant-based meat related that we showed. Dairy typically fares a little better. I think some of, especially the frozen products, the desserts, the ice creams, are really good. But yeah, this is a huge point that I think that's one of the reasons plant-based jumped off is because they were calling themselves plant-based instead of vegan for a while, where vegan was kind of turning some people off. And so I agree, completely that, to kind of gain more market share, they have to be working on getting those people who are not strictly vegans to be consuming more of these products. All right, and then again, one of the mega trends that we've been seeing is this is online shopping, specifically related to a lot of our grocery. And Jeff, what's going on here?
Yeah, so we've looked at this a couple of times over the past couple of years, but we wanted to update it obviously for our end of the year review. And kind of on the left-hand side, we're looking at shoppers that shop in store, so they're going into brick and mortar at least once a week. And over the past couple of years, that's been fairly static, about 63%. But this past year, we've seen that inch up to about 66%. So, we are seeing shoppers heading back into stores. And then if we look at shoppers on the right-hand side, these are shoppers online. So this could be click and collect. This could be shipped to home. Any sort of online purchase would qualify in this area. And you saw between 2020 and 2021, this huge jump. We heard that all over the industry, and we continue to see that jump between 21 and 22, but we're starting to slow down a little bit. So kind of, overall, the idea that we have a preference for brick and mortar and that online grocery is still there, but for a number of reasons that we'll kind of cover in a sec, this idea of being back in store, kind of COVID a bit in the rearview mirror. Obviously, there are still cases, but some preferences to be back in store versus online.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so with this one, this was a great article that we ran across that we wanted to kind of pull out. This is from Grocery Dive, our friends at Grocery Dive. And, about 50% of shoppers, a little over, prefer in-store shopping. And, the graph that we've included from their article down below really kind of breaks this out by age cohorts. So all respondents, and then boomers, millennial parents, Gen Z, and then they're actually breaking it out by affluent shoppers. So on the top of that, we're looking at in-store preferences and below online preferences. And so the thing that jumps out is that, over 70% of all respondents prefer to shop in store. And that breaks down a little bit differently depending on the cohort that we're looking at. So boomers have a little bit more preference than, for example, Gen Z, and that makes sense. Gen Z are digitally native. Purchasing online is not something that's new or revolutionary. It's just how they go about living their lives and doing their business. But boomers have this kind of, this idea, this kind of habit of shopping in store, and they really like to be able to touch and feel, and that in store really does solve for that. And then if we're looking at online below, you see that 51% that we talked about earlier, but again, you see baby boomers about 42%, so they're actually skewing a little lower. And then if we look at millennial parents, those with kids at home, so these are time pressured, time strapped folks that have tons of competing priorities, you're seeing that they're really turning to online shopping to be able to do their shopping, take care of their kids, go to work, all the other stuff that they've got packed into their day. So I think this kind of generational kind of idea of what, which cohort prefers in-store versus online, you really kind of got to get into the weeds. But overall, most shoppers do prefer to get in-store for that experience.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised the millennial parents is as high enjoying it in store as it is with how busy things can get, and then also that gap between the affluent shoppers is actually is pretty staggering too. So that's, I think, the largest not price differential, but a percent differentiator on there. So that's definitely something to think about as we think about channel strategies for brands, and especially retailers knowing their customers as well.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so we also use some panel data. And so what we're looking at is we're looking on the right-hand side, all product shoppers that are shopping in 4 different outlets. And then we're putting the natural lens on it to see how shoppers are purchasing. And so first thing, I'll start from the bottom. You'll see that natural product shoppers are more likely to purchase online than all product shoppers, almost twice the amount. And so that kind of gets back to maybe some of this affluency. I think there's a lot kind of packed into that 9.2% from the different cohorts. But certainly that's something that's, I think, fairly telling. When we look at Walmart, for example, it's not surprising that about a quarter of folks, all product shoppers, are shopping at Walmart. When you're getting into natural product shoppers, it's about 13%. But 13% is a huge number of natural shoppers. It's certainly higher than what we see for online shopping. And, when we talk about kind of in-store, almost half of natural product shoppers are shopping in traditional food outlets. So these are kind of the mainstay grocery outlets that we know, and that's fairly stable. You see that kind of only inched up just a hair. And when you look at all product shoppers, again, fairly consistent within that segment of the market. And when you look at Club's down just a little bit, both for all products as well as for natural shoppers.
Yeah, and this is, I know we're showing year over year, but Jeff, we've been looking at this for many years, and these numbers remain, the story at least remains the same. It's about 2 times the rate of natural shoppers shopping online, just under half amount as Walmart shopping at Walmart. So this is really a steady story. So again, for brands, as you consider your strategy, it's really important to think about where your consumers are shopping. Again, they're changing values and what attributes are important to them.
And one other thing that I'll just kind of point out, because when we say internet or online sales, that could be any purchase online. So that could be that could be Walmart.com. That could be for any sort of kind of larger grocery store chain that does a click and collect. And so we're segmenting out those numbers. And so it's not necessarily mutually exclusive. And so the idea that an omni-channel strategy for retailers is so important. Really, I think, this lays it out really well, particularly when you're thinking about natural shoppers in some of those shoppers that are looking for preference in their products.
Yeah, and they tend to be more particular in what products they're buying. So that makes sense that they're doing a lot more search. And again, plugging it, having your product content available online is just so important as you meet your consumers there.
Yep. Yeah, so the other thing we wanted to look at is if we're looking at e-commerce, we're using our clear-cut Amazon data and our brick and mortar data that we have. And so really the idea that brick and mortar locations are what is contributing to the majority of growth at our current view. You see that about a little over a third of sales are coming, and we're looking specifically at vitamins and supplements here just to illustrate the point. But you see about a third of sales coming from Amazon and 2/3 coming from brick and mortar locations. But when you see that contribution to growth, you do see that slowing down for Amazon within vitamins and supplements specifically, that the majority of the contribution of growth is coming back from brick and mortar. So it's a little bit of a reversal that we've seen over the past couple of years. And that just really highlights that, this sort of story that we've heard about brick and mortar just, giving way to online sales. It's a bit more complicated, and certainly omni-channel is incredibly important, but brick and mortar still does have that home field advantage, and so many different shoppers and customers go there to discover products and for a range of other reasons.
And the retailers, the brick and mortar, they've really responded with bringing in their assortment of trending products. We're going to get into a lot of the trending products coming. But you used to have to search online for some of these more niche products or health focuses in the supplement space. And now, the most conventional retailers, have a very wide selection going on. And so this graph is really interesting because a few years ago, the contribution to growth was pretty much flipped. The majority of it was coming from Amazon. And so, this is not to say that we think online shopping is going away, right? Where this is just kind of a recalibration. Some of those early pandemic behaviors were just, the permanency of them was really overstated. And so we're seeing a lot of that contribution to growth going back to the stores, which is, a very healthy environment for retail as well.
Yep. All
right. So those are kind of our mega trends. And so as we get into, some of these supplement trends, something it's really, you can't avoid hearing about mushrooms. It's not just I want to correct myself. It's not just in supplements. We're seeing it across, all over the store. So Jake, what's going on with super mushrooms? What's the latest? This was a huge trend of 22.
Yeah. So here, Scott, as you mentioned, we're taking a look at a group of key functional ingredients that we did have our eye on here in 2022. So super mushrooms, think like reishi, turkey tail, things like cordyceps, lion's mane, etc. These were predicted to be highly sought after, kind of considering their association with a kind of like this wide range of prominent health focuses. So with these like specific health wants or needs, things like immunity support, energy, cognitive support kind of being top of mind, shoppers were primed to really respond here and puts super mushrooms in a really great position to really kind of take the lid off their potential and become further mainstreamed. And what we saw in 2022 performance-wise, it was kind of a mixed bag. And it really kind of depended on what department you're looking at here. So over in vitamins and supplements, kind of where super mushrooms really first took off, we did see growth slow down a bit. It's still growing, but maybe showing some signs of leveling off or just maximizing some current potential. But when we look over in food and beverage, we see super mushrooms perform really well at nearly 22% growth. And on top of it, super mushroom products were able to expand their footprint here and gain some traction in new categories. So things like cookies and snack bars, kind of like what we talked about earlier, kind of where brands were looking to differentiate, with functional ingredients that will resonate on the shelf with shoppers. Something else that, we kind of saw emerging in food and beverage a lot of times Our super mushrooms, typically, they're more like the star ingredient, kind of like that featured ingredient that products are centered around. But if we look deeper in some of the examples here, we're starting to see super mushrooms kind of get that typical superfood treatment, right? They're being added to products that, are leveraging, maybe several other superfood ingredients in their formulation. So they're not necessarily always the star ingredient anymore, but they're being incorporated into formulations almost in the same way that, something like kale, quinoa, or cauliflower and acai are today.
Yeah, and I think this is just a great example. We always talk about how ingredients become popular in supplements, and then there's this really short life cycle now where then they merge into functional beverage, then functional food. And so, a year or two ago, that VMS growth for super mushrooms was really high, and we're seeing that's pretty much flat now, but huge growth in food and beverage. So again, this is another great example, but if you want to know what the next huge ingredients are in functional food and beverage, check out what's happening in supplements this year. Jake, is there any specific mushroom you want to call out that you think has more potential as we go into next year, or any category?
Honestly, not so much like a specific mushroom, but I would say it's the mushrooms that are gonna have more of a tie into things like adaptogens, and I think that's really where this is going to land here in food and beverage, and that's where we're going to kind of continue to see a lot of growth. So those adaptogen-like qualities being incorporated into beverage, I think that's kind of the next step here in super mushrooms kind of continued growth.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that kind of takes us to adaptogens and stress supplements. We've seen, stress has been top of people's mind for quite a few years now. And they're looking at ingredients, that will help them, manage their stress, or marketed as such. And so we saw, a few years ago now, it was CBD that made the big splash, as something to calm and relax. But we've seen, this huge rise in traditional ingredients. And in 21, ashwagandha was the biggest winner for functional ingredients. And this is an ingredient that's been around, forever. And so to see it have this emergence, and as we talked about with super mushrooms, you see it's not only in supplements, you're seeing it across food and beverage. And we're able to track this as an ingredient, so you can see kind of where the opportunities are. From everything from, we're even seeing some of it in skincare now. And so, we've talked about ashwagandha so much over the past couple of years. There are a lot of other ingredients to talk about. L-theanine's been one. Some of the mushrooms. I'm drawing a blank now, so someone could jump in and save me. But and other of the cannabinoids as well coming in. Magnesium is another one, that you're seeing trends in. So really, this focus on stress isn't going to go away. I think we're going to see a lot more, functional beverages incorporating them. People are drinking less alcohol. We're going to get into that. But one of the alternatives is to have a drink that still kind of relaxes them, takes that edge off. And I think adaptogens and other, supplemental ingredients, or traditionally supplement ingredients, are going to kind of fill that void.
Yeah, and Scott, you're kind of listing off all the ingredients for like anxiety and stress relief, and it'll be interesting to watch, especially in 2023. What ingredient does kind of rise to the top? What's resonating with shoppers, and which of those ingredients maybe aren't resonating as much. So I think that'll be something very, very interesting to watch here in 2023.
Yeah, and especially if there's another adaptogen that's going to kind of take some of the shine from ashwagandha. And I thought that would happen this year, with an ingredient, maybe a rhodiola or something like that. It didn't really happen, but I think there's big opportunity for one of those traditional adaptogen ingredients to kind of take some of that shine.
Yeah, and like one to keep an eye on. It's been around obviously for some time, but magnesium. I think we're kind of seeing that pop up in a few new categories being used in different ways. So that might be one that kind of contends here in the stress supplement space.
Okay, awesome. And then kind of related to stress, We've seen a lot of sleep, as well as other stress and sleep support and mood support products, getting in some new delivery methods. And one of the ones that's kind of starting to bubble up, this isn't by any means a mega trend, but we're seeing these different formats for ingredients like melatonin, things like patches for sleep, that's, supposed to give you kind of sustained release overnight. We see this even for things like kids products. So the innovation and delivery vehicle, we always tend to think of it as consumables, either a traditional supplement, or we've been talking about, foods and beverages. But things like topicals and patches and other delivery methods are being tried out by brands to see if they're sticking with consumers. And mentioned earlier, people are drinking less alcohol. They still want these special beverages. This has been a monster trend over the past couple of years. Jake, what's the latest?
All right, yeah. So here we're taking a quick look at non-alcoholic or alcohol alternative beverages and their performance over 2022. So kind of in order to help, kind of streamline this concept, we pulled out 8 key groups here. So everything from like NA beer, CBD beverages, to kombucha and hop waters. And what we're seeing are strong growth numbers, especially in the smaller, kind of more innovative and emerging segments. So first we have hop waters and other hop flavored beverages at nearly 65% growth. And those are definitely on the upswing as they begin to, kind of really blur some of those merchandising lines between kind of like the grab and go cooler and the beer shelf. We saw things like Lagunitas and Hoplark. They were early innovators in that space, but they started to kind of, attract a crowd, especially as, more beer brands like Sierra Nevada. We have Athletic Brewing with their day pack sparkling hop water. We're starting to see more beer brands like that, push into this non-beer beverage segment. So another one to call out, we have CBD and cannabinoid focused beverages at 19%. CBD beverages, they definitely remain a bright spot in that CBD marketplace and kind of showing, CBD's staying power as more of a lifestyle-like product as well. And then, of course, we have NA beers, which have been a key trend in the beer category now for some time. And really, they're continuing to expand their shelf presence, as well as their industry presence in general. In 2022, we saw Athletic become one of the top craft brewers by production volume. So, that's a good sign that this segment, isn't done growing. And it's just getting started here.
And I think it's worth noting when you look at these products, they're really indistinguishable from their alcohol counterparts. Like the marketing's the same, the positioning's the same. So, I think, that catching on to that, people still want these specialty beverages that give them kind of a good feeling. It's still there. And so, one of the stats we always pull on is we know that, Gen Z and millennials aren't drinking as much alcohol, but it's going to be replaced by something. So whether it's some of these mocktail or non-alcoholic versions of traditionally alcoholic things, or things like those functional beverages that still elicit some sort of, relaxation or some other functionality, we're going to see there's huge opportunity in the beverage space. And the beverage space seems to always be kind of a lead innovator. And so I think there's a lot more to come in this segment for 23.
Yeah.
Scott, I was just going to add something to this. I know that over the past 3 to 4 years, this has been the biggest trend across sources every year for trend predictions that alternative alcohol alternatives, just continue to get bigger and bigger. But even at the past few expo shows, we've seen so many nice new innovative products come in, even where if you choose to still drink alcohol, you could put it out at a party or an event where if you choose to mix it with something, that's great. But if you choose not to, that's great too. So it's even more discreet and welcoming for all people. So I think to your point, the product is great and very versatile and not even what it was 5 or 10 years ago. So it just continues to get better and better with new innovation and brands coming into the market.
Yeah, and I say, they look indistinguishable. And to build off your point, I think we've all been, at that event where we, had the tonic water and lime when we're trying to, still look like we're being social. And this just gives so many people so many more opportunities to have something, a more fun and interesting beverage as we go into it. There's going to be a lot more innovation here for sure. And that kind of builds into our next category. I know it's a little bit of a choppy segue, but sports nutrition has remained one of the fastest growing supplement categories when we talk about performance nutrition, and that's not even taking into account the huge growth that we're seeing within sports nutrition that's really being positioned in the energy drink segment. I think one of the biggest trends over the past couple of years that's actually may have, compared to some of the other ones, flown under the radar a little bit, is this huge competitive rise in these performance energy drinks. Going from very niche, in specialty stores to really getting a lot of mainstream investment and distribution. And so you see some of the brands here that have really been doing well. These are, more mid to high caffeine products. Incorporating other things like nootropics. But these performance energy drinks, they're eating into, traditionally powdered pre-workout products as well as the traditional energy drink market. And so that's what makes the performance nutrition supplement space growth of almost 41% even the more remarkable, because they're just attracting so many more consumers, particularly in the I guess we're still referring to it as the older generations, but people who are traditionally not purchasing these products. A lot has to do with, the kind of softening of the marketing of a lot of products. It's, not as hardcore. Also, women are being, expanded into this market when it's really traditionally a young male market. That's no longer the case. Everyone's having their protein we're seeing across the store. So here are some of the other categories. We're going to see a lot more innovation in this category in the years to come as well. One of the reasons for the growth, and this is the only part that makes me, I typically don't call it sports nutrition anymore. I want to call it active lifestyle nutrition. Whether gaming contributes to your active lifestyle, I guess, is up for debate. But this is a monster trend of people taking, some of these products for improvement in their esports and gaming. It's a huge market. There's a lot of money in it, a lot of sponsorship in it, and just a lot of interest in playing some of these games. And so we're seeing interesting things like an ingredient called New Level, which is studied directly on gaming performance. So traditionally, a lot of these would be on different physical activity. And, we were at Supply Side West, and there was another ingredient that was being studied specifically for gamers as well. So, with this big interest and this investment, you're going to see a lot more of these really specifically tailored products to the gaming community. And it continues to be, mostly, ready to drinks that are doing well. But we're also seeing, products that are powdered products similar to a powdered pre-workout or an energy or focus product. It'll be interesting to see if this expands into things like eye health and other brain boosting products as well. But right now, a lot of energy focused things, and we're seeing a core group of brands really dominating the market right now. We'll see if there's room for new brand entrants as well. But something to keep an eye out. I admittedly was very late on this trend. But it's here, and it's here to stay.